So hey guys, welcome to another book review. I know I haven't done one of these in a while. Um, so for those who saw my Hunger Games book review and my Catching Fire book review, I finally finished Mockingjay, which was the final book in the Hunger Games trilogy. So I'm here to review that for you today. So Mockingjay, you guys, this book basically wraps up the entire trilogy. The Hunger Games that basically was meant to be a trilogy. I don't think Suzanne Collins has any plans of a fourth one. Um, and after reading this book, that kind of makes sense. But in this book, you guys, I'm going to try to be, I'll definitely give you the synopsis, but at the same time, I don't want to get too detailed to the point where, for those who plan to see the movie of this when it finally comes out, because I know the Catching Fire movies still yet to be released in November of this year, November 2013. And I think the film adaptation of this one is November of 2014, and I think part two. So yeah, this one will be like a two-part movie, kind of like what Harry Potter did. Two movies. I think so. Part one of this will be in November 2014. I think the following year, November of 2015, will be part two of Mockingjay. So it's kind of interesting how they're doing that. More than likely, it's probably just for the money, though. So in Mockingjay, you guys, probably the safest way for me to sum up what the book is about, without giving away too much, and for those who haven't read Catching Fire yet, things of that nature. In this one, basically, Katniss is, basically they're trying to get rid of the Hunger Games. For those who've seen the movie or have read the first book, President Snow, who's kind of, basically the president of the capital, um, he's in charge of all the districts. Basically, they're trying to kill him off in this last book. From events from the first story and then the second story. In this one, Katniss basically wants to kill him for good, in hopes that basically the Hunger Games will end. There's ways of making this big revolt work so that way people don't have to sacrifice these kids to participate in these Hunger Game events. Um, and throughout the story, they have to plan things. There's a lot of setting up and tricking people, assassinating other people to get to President Snow and things of that nature. So this book is kind of a quest of revenge in some way. I guess Katniss is out to um, basically like I said, kill President Snow in hopes to end the Hunger Games for good. Um, and I can't get into too much detail, but I will say something happens throughout the second book and this book that really convinces Katniss to really go after President Snow. So it's not just for the sake of others, but she kind of has some personal business with him too that she definitely wants to seek him out for throughout the quest of the third book. So for positives and negatives, you guys, um, I like some of the character reasonings in this. Like I said, Katniss definitely her motivations for certain things are really interesting and they make a lot of sense. So I like how Suzanne Collins was able to, like with Peta and Haymitch, and mostly the good guy characters, and even some of the villainous ones had some reasonable reasoning behind certain things. So I like the character reasoning behind this book. There is action and danger scenes in here, and that's probably one of the more exciting parts of the book to read. Just because either Katniss has to get out of something, take down some things, to get to President Snow, take care of some people that work for Snow, and things of that nature. So some really neat action and danger scenes throughout this story. Um, I think the characters get interesting when they're under pressure in this. It definitely that happens a lot when you know like they're under fire from people who work for President Snow, or they're under fire for people who are kind of revolting against the revolters, in the sense that kind of this war of should we keep the Hunger Games, shouldn't we, things of that nature. And certain perspectives on this book's universe I thought was really interesting too. There's a lot of characters talking about like why these Hunger Games are so awful. Even though it was this very tragic time in history, why are we doing all these sacrifices with all these kids? Um, so it kind of asks. It was interesting because the book asks probably its own questions. And rather than just giving the answers to whatever the reader might have about this book universe, the book kind of asks itself questions. It asks itself some questions, and it answers itself the best it can using what's going on in the story and things of that nature. So whenever that happened, I really liked that part of this book. So for the negatives, this is a very slow moving book. In fact, this one probably took the longest out of all three books for me to read. And I don't think it's just because, I'm more of a slow reader. I definitely like to take my time with reading. I'm definitely like a 1 or 2 chapter a day kind of person. I'm not one of those people who can cram a whole book in within 1 or 2 days. Just not that quick. And I don't think I can do it for that long just because my mind kind of goes all over the place. But very slow moving, and it was disappointing in that sense, just because it really takes a long time to make its point on some parts, and that's really too bad because I think with a more quicker paced storyline, more planning as far as how the book would be structured, I think this book needed to be a much more quicker pace when it comes to storytelling. There was too many scenes involving planning and setup, I thought, and the reason why that's bad is because by the time when something happens action-wise, or it's another big story point, or Katniss Everdeen and some friends get closer to President Snow, there's just so much planning and setup. By the time it really happens, from what they were setting up and planning, it's not very long. So it's almost like the book had not a lot of content. So to hide that, they made the planning scenes seem longer for some reason, and I really think that takes away from the experience of the book. It's fine if you want to have planning and set up scenes, but tell an actual story too. Make sure that the setup and the planning stuff have payoff. They definitely happen, but it just doesn't feel like the playoff that the most readers might want from a book like this, specifically since it's the finale and everything. Um, this really is the weakest of the trilogy. That's another negative I have. Just really not a well structured book compared to the first two. Not a terrible book, but as far as structure, how it compares to the first two books in the trilogy, really weak sequel, I guess. So weak conclusion story. I also thought this book needed more of an actual Hunger Games element. The Hunger Games actually was about the Hunger Games, catching fire without me giving too much away. Um, had an event in it very similar to the Hunger Games from the first story. Um, with this book, like I said, it's basically just Katniss trying to get revenge on President Snow, trying to end the Hunger Games. Even though there's Hunger Game related stuff in here, I would have preferred something that had a much more Hunger Games element to it. Um, so overall, guys, I do give Mockingjay a 7.5 out of 10. It's an okay book. Um, it wrapped itself up reasonably. Not the best ending I've seen of a book trilogy or anything. Um, so Mockingjay, it's okay. 7.5 out of 10 for me. Make sure you read the first two books before reading this one. Hopefully, Catching Fire will be good this November. And whenever the film adaptation or adaptations for this book come out, I hope they're really great.